what does molecular literacy bring to the table? That's kind of where I started with my research question. And right now in the United States, we have a 50% failure rate for students taking a chemistry class. And that's been like that for the past 30, 40 years. So no matter what we're doing in K through 12 education to prepare kids for a career in science, we're falling short on this aspect. And through this investigation, I also uncovered some other literacies, dimensional literacy, that goes hand in hand with molecular literacy. And a little bit of quantitative literacy, meaning using numbers to tell a story. So what does a story mean? How does a story change with more data?
Welcome to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Today I have the great pleasure of having with me Dr. Colleen Kelly. Colleen holds a PhD in chemistry from Penn State University. She was awarded a Chateaubriand Fellowship to conduct research at the Université Pasteur in Strasbourg, France, under the direction of Nobel Prize winner Jean-Marie Laine. Colleen was a tenured faculty member with research expertise in environmental toxicology, medicinal chemistry, and chemistry education. During Colleen's 30 years of teaching chemistry, she became aware that her students were struggling with basic concepts, including fluency with the symbols for the elements themselves. Creating fun and accessible chemistry stories has been a labor of love for her as a retired University of Arizona chemistry professor and author of a series of kids' chemistry comic books. In 2023, the PBS short documentary Comic Book Chemistry was awarded an Emmy. Colleen shared her vision recently in a TEDx talk this year titled Molecular Literacy for Ages 8 to 108. Colleen, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you here on Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD.
Thank you so much, David. Yeah, this is great.
Thank you for taking the time to come on the show. So, yeah, I'm super happy to have you here. Of course, for many reasons, but one of them is this mission of yours. We hear now, of course, computer literacy. There's many. Literacy has taken many colors in the media when you hear about it. It's no longer just reading and writing. And here you are, after your career doing research, publishing a lot of peer-reviewed papers, like I mentioned, going to France to study under a Nobel laureate. But throughout this experience, something, a kind of a data point kind of built itself around your experience with students. And you understood that there was a specific type of literacy that was, if not endangered, it was underutilized or underdeveloped in young people. But so, of course, we're going to talk about that, and I really am eager to talk about how comic books can be a conduit to teach very young people like these things that are quite complex already. But maybe I'm going to start by letting you talk a little bit more about yourself, about your journey, about this arc of becoming a researcher, teaching, and then this next chapter of taking on this mantle and this mission of increasing chemistry literacy in very young people, but not only. So I'll let you share a little bit more of that.
Sure. My journey began with a curiosity about chemistry and what that meant. And I was fortunate enough to have a very, very good high school chemistry teacher who was animated and who told stories himself and made problem solving fun. And I'll back that up a little bit. I'm a first generation college student with no expectations at all to go to college. That wasn't put on my plate by my family. So my journey was one of pure love because I was not raised by scientists, say you will be a scientist. It was quite the contrary. When I mentioned I wanted to go to college, everybody was a little bit shocked and a little horrified, because how are they going to pay for it? And that wasn't part of the plan. And, it was, so my form of rebellion was getting a PhD. And so that's not normally the rebellious route, but I was
No.
following my heart and my passion. And so I came for a love for molecules and chemistry through imagination.
Mm,
And I hadn't realized it at the time, but looking back on it, when I was studying chemistry, I could see the molecules, and it wasn't hard for me to see them. And the folks out there in the audience who know what that means, musicians say sometimes they can see the music, right? They can see it kind of flowing and dancing. So there's all kinds of abstract, imaginary visions that we can see when the world is invisible to us. So I fast forward, I tell that story because I fast forward to becoming a first year professor and teaching organic chemistry to 200 plus students, thinking this is going to be so much fun because I had just loved it. And when they were struggling, I didn't understand because, I came from nothing and had no background in it, and found it quite delightful. And it was, I don't want to say easy, but it was natural for me to see all these transformations. I could see a nucleophilic substitution reaction quite clearly in my mind. It wasn't difficult for me to imagine those transformations. So my big question became, for 30 years, why do my students think chemistry is so hard? Because they have an A in everything else. If you're taking organic chemistry, you probably had an A in everything from tying your shoes to present day organic chemistry. And I would hear these stories. They would come to my office with, Dr. Kelly, I have a 4.0. This is the first class I've ever, you know, looked at. A C or a D or even a B would be devastating. And it wasn't because of lack of effort. It wasn't because of lack of desire. But what it was is because of lack of what I call molecular literacy. They weren't able to see what I see in my brain. And no amount of tutoring, no amount of, you can't pound that into someone, right? You either see it or you don't. And so organic chemistry students have all these workarounds. And that's why often you hear, well, it's just about memorization. They have to memorize it because they're molecularly illiterate. Again, if someone is illiterate, they have to memorize things, and what words look like. They're not fluent enough to get past that. So, illiteracy is finding workarounds, being able to navigate society. And so these students find workarounds, but they fall short, right, of their success mark, which is usually an A. And they can memorize a bunch, they can study for 40 hours a week, and if you can't see it, it's still not going to be there. And that was heartbreaking to me to realize that I had a gift. Where did I get that gift was a question, because I certainly didn't get it from being raised by scientists, or all the things people assume about a chemistry professor are not
mhm.
true for me, at least. And so how was I able to do it? Why aren't they able to do it? And what does molecular literacy bring to the table? So that's kind of where I started with my research question. And right now in the United States, we have a 50% failure rate, for students taking a chemistry class. So failure means failure, withdrawal, drop, or C or below, right? You can't use it for your major. So it's and that's been like that for the past, I don't know, 30, 40 years. So that data hasn't changed. So no matter what we're doing in K through 12 education to prepare kids for a career in science, we're falling short on this aspect. And through this investigation, I also uncovered some other literacies, dimensional literacy, that goes hand in hand with molecular literacy, and a little bit of quantitative literacy, meaning using numbers to tell a story. So, not being able to do calculus, but using numbers to actually tell a story. What does a story mean? How does a story change with more data? How does a story change with less data? That kind of thing. So, I realized in K through 12 we were not addressing these fundamental basic skills, and students were getting through science, if possible, with some workarounds. But then again, organic chemistry was a course with zero workarounds. If you don't have any, if you are not dimensionally literate and if you're not molecularly literate, the course will be very daunting for you.
And I have a question. You mentioned a teacher that was influential for you,
Mhm.
and that allowed you to develop this passion for chemistry. And I'm wondering whether, given that from the side of your family, what you got was kind of surprised that this was the route you were you were going to follow, and then the other preoccupations that came with it. But given that for you it came naturally, like you said, um, was there were there key moments when you felt that that was your calling, and that you'd kind of need to fend for yourself and make it happen on your own? Were there people around you that kind of championed you, like this teacher? Were there other ways that you were allowed and helped to develop this skill that you had and then make it your career? How did it happen for you, given that now you're trying to get young people,
Yeah.
to help them? How did you get some sort of help in that way, maybe in other domains?
Yeah, I would say my molecular literacy and my abilities in this area came to me from reading. My grandmother worked at a bookstore and gave me books, and as soon as I could hold my head up. And books were my world, and I loved to read. And she introduced me to mysteries, and I started with Nancy Drew, and then I went to Agatha Christie, and so I read mysteries voraciously. I completed all of those series, and the great thing about reading and books is not only did my grandma work in a bookstore, but libraries are free. So you could go to a library and I could devour as much as I wanted for free in a library. And then you could go to a school library and get nonfiction books and read kind of nonfiction. So I just immerse myself in reading and what reading does, right? Because it's two dimensional to three dimensional. Words are two dimensional. The story in your mind is three dimensional. So when I talk about dimensional literacy, imagination is part of that because it is reading a book and seeing this. And again, I grew up before computers were around, so I had no computers. We had the card catalog to look up stuff, and when I got to graduate school, we still didn't have computers, and we had a photocopy from journals. So even reading journal articles is, you're taking the words and you're imagining the sequence. So my entire life was that transformation of words to imagination and then to write stories back again. So I my that's where my skill set was cultivated. And I think that's really important for folks to hear why reading is so important, and why reading without the images is super important because it forces that world to be developed in your mind. And I think, if folks read Harry Potter first and then watch the movie, you're kind of surprised, right? Because you've already developed your own Harry Potter world. And
Definitely.
then all of a sudden you see it, you're like, wait, that's not what I imagined. So it's that kind of skill set. So, and as far as teachers go, my high school teacher was, very, very animated, very nice. I wouldn't say anybody championed my college endeavor until I got to college. And um, a young professor, I asked a young professor if I could do research with her. And she said, sure. And I didn't even know what that meant. Someone had just told me they were doing research. And I said, sure, I'll do research too. I didn't know what research was. But so as a freshman, she just said yes. And, sometimes that yes will change your life. And she took me under her wing. She was straight out of MIT, 29 years old, and just taught me the ropes all through college about what is research, and what does that mean. And then she's the one, she said you should get a PhD, and I just said sure. I didn't even know what that was either, but um, sometimes you just have someone that really watches out for you. So it was a little bit later in my journey that the world of research really kind of came into my purview.
Mhm. And then, so research, teaching, and well, now teaching younger kids, but bringing this knowledge to a wider audience with your books. Um, and one of the things that one of the reflections that come with what you're sharing is that we're talking here specifically, uh, your story and your mission has to do with chemistry and with this like 3D chemistry literacy, but different people, and when we get to graduate school, it can get even, the challenges can get tougher. Different people will have an ease at different parts of whatever the subject matter is, and I'd really be interested in hearing how how you went from uncovering or understanding that there was a gap there, and like you said, so this 50% failure rate, etc., means that the gap is serious and it's been there for a while also, like you said. But how then did you go from there to, what, I'm going to find a way? So putting it another way, you could have just hypothetically been in a position of not understanding why they didn't see it, because for you it came naturally, but instead you said, okay, you know what, I'm going to understand this better and find a way to bring this knowledge to them and make them able to kind of wrap their head around it and then use it going forward. And then you went to storytelling and to comic books. I'd love to hear how that whole reflection happened. Have you drawn throughout life? Is it something that comes naturally? Anyway, I'm totally curious about how that materialized.
Sure, yeah. Going back to that epiphany about my students, and you said it correctly. I think most faculty do just accept that. I mean, we say organic chemistry is a weed out course. Oh, well. And we shrug our shoulders and we talk about, our terrible grades in faculty meeting. And, we shoulder the tears of thousands of students over years. And I just kept coming back. And I think there's a comment that said many times to folks in the sciences with a PhD too, oh, you're brilliant or something to that. And I just kept thinking about my background and think, at no point was that, part of my childhood it wasn't like that. I wasn't winning spelling bees or, science competitions. I was just reading books quietly. So I don't know what that comment meant, and it would concern me because it felt like a cop out. Like, well, of course you can do it because you're brilliant, and I think no, I don't know about that. So let's figure this out. And um, what I realized first was that my students couldn't see what I saw, and that came during a profound moment in an office hour when I had a student come to me early on in the semester when we were, drawing hydrocarbons. And she said to me, she said, "Dr. Kelly, what are all these sticks?" And and I was a little shocked because it was, a few weeks into the course. And I said, "What do you mean sticks?" And she said, "Well, all these lines on this page." And I'm like, "Well, they're bonds. And at the apex of the two lines meeting is a carbon atom with, hydrogens to saturate it." And it was still, and I'm like, wow, they are seeing sticks. They do not even see, I could draw a cyclohexane, chair, boat, whatever, and they're just looking at me like it might as well be Mandarin that I'm writing up there. And um, so that was a profound moment when I thought, she can't see what I'm seeing. And if she can't, probably no one else can. And she was just courageous enough to come to office hours and ask. And when I
Kudos to
realized
her
that,
for that.
yeah, yeah. And then I just said, okay, well, I need to describe these in ways that they can see. So then I started giving characteristics. For example, I would use Winnie the Pooh characters if we're looking at, there's a phenomenon called a leaving group. So some of the halogens will leave a molecule. So I would say fluorine's like Piglet and clingy and small, and it's going to hold on tight and not be a very good leaving group. And bromine's like Winnie the Pooh and big and fluffy and poofy and will wander off into the 100-acre woods with not a thought and a care in the world. And that sticks. And so I would try to give these characteristics. And once you start introducing things like Winnie the Pooh, Disney type characters. I would often use characters from Shrek, those kind of things. The temperature in the room goes down, and when the temperature goes down, when laughter starts ensuing, then brains open up, right? So then the imagination can come in. So regardless of how serious the course is that I'm teaching, it I could keep teaching it without these characters and accept what's happening, or I could try to see, what happens if we have a little fun and explain it this way. And I would get students coming back to me saying, when I took my medical exam, the MCAT, I was imagining that. I knew my leaving groups because of that story, those kind of things. So they were working, and eventually I was running out of different pop culture references, so I started creating my own characters for these
Mhm.
stories. So for the longest time, they were just things that I would bring to the classroom and tell them, and then use those as templates for case studies or a synthesis problem or something like that. Sometimes we would act out the molecules so that we would have a play where, your terp-butyl bromide and your hydroxide, and let's see what happens between you two. So as much movement and dynamic and visualization to kind of bridge that imagination through the sticks that they were seeing on the page to try to see if that would work. And it did work for the most part, but I just took that and said, okay, now how do I get this to a broader audience than just the 200 or 300 students I see in my classroom?
Mhm. And then anyway, it's great that you mentioned someone coming back and saying that they passed their MCAT with using those mnemonics and those techniques to remember things that to them are not instinctively understandable, let's say. And this makes me think of the whole effort scientists in general have today, or people in health related with health have to try and explain, I don't know, RNA vaccines to people out there. And I imagine that you're also kind of leaving students with this kind of heritage of, you know what, you don't need to speak a very hermetic language to teach or explain science. You can actually use like pop culture references if that's what helps people see it as or find it memorable and have it stick in their minds. It's really interesting. Now,
Yeah.
the other thing that surprised me was that you were now, your although your audience is from 8 years old to 108, the
Yeah.
books that you're making and the work that you're doing now is with younger kids. And I'm thinking of my kids, and I'm wondering, how did you, how did you understand that this was now your audience, that you could actually go bring this literacy, which usually, like you said, it's university level, to before university and actually to quite young kids. How did that reflection come about? And one reason why I find it interesting is very often people who meet someone who has PhD after their name think, oh, this person talks to, during, all day, talks with other scientists, and, is hard to understand probably because they'll use a lot of jargon. And here you are now, living proof that, yeah, not only you can share this knowledge with your students, which is expected in university, but not only. younger kids can actually also profit from researchers in learning some aspects of basic science that are actually how can I say that they can actually grasp and then keep for their own personal literacy throughout life. And this the your current target audience got me very curious, and I'd love to hear how you got to it.
Sure, yeah. I think it came back to again watching some of my, this time, students in a freshman chemistry class.
Mm.
And they're struggling, and I'm grading their exam, and they're getting all these problems wrong, and I'm thinking, what is happening here? And when I examined it, we have several elements that start with the capital letter C, lower letter A: calcium, carbon, cadmium, right? Very different.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Incredibly different weights, different properties. And the student was thinking, mixing up calcium with carbon, but I've seen students mix up the three of them, right? So if you don't have the alphabet of science down, right? And so I call the alphabet of science the periodic table. If you're not proficient with that, and you're under pressure, you have less than an hour to finish an exam, and you're scanning the periodic table looking for the correct molecular weight of carbon, and you land on calcium because there's no name underneath, you just see Ca, you're like, okay, that sounds good, and why not, right? It's reasonable. And then all of a sudden you failed the exam because you had the wrong, and it perpetrates throughout problems. And many times I hear instructors, and me included, I was in this pool for a long time, said, "Well, we don't need to teach the periodic table." And I would tell my students, "Oh no, you don't need to memorize that." And then it took me about 25 years to say, "Oh wait, that would be like telling a 4-year-old you don't need to know the alphabet, right? So every time you're going to write your name, you can look it up." And
Yeah.
that's what we were saying. We're like, every time, we're like, well, we'll give you a periodic table during the exam. And the AP exam even does this. We'll give you a periodic table. You can look it up. You'll have that. You don't need to know it. That, again, that would be like saying, well, I want you to write this essay, and we're going to give you the alphabet. And you can write it. And the proficiency goes down, the fluency goes down. And so we have kids memorize the alphabet, right? They have to. It's part of fluency. And so I had to backtrack on my own values and think, wait a minute, it's not quite, and we never really have kids memorize the alphabet. There's a whole literary procedure where we're learning to read, where you might have blocks, you might have cards, you might have flashcards. So there's a whole sequence. And I thought the periodic table has 4 times as many letter combinations as the alphabet does. We give them maybe 1 year, maybe, before they go to college with it, and then expect them to be able to put all these together like lickety split. And so, if you can imagine teaching the alphabet to 17-year-olds and then sending them to college and saying, now you need to write an essay on Hemingway, read it and write an essay, right? That's what we're doing with chemistry. So,
Yeah.
really, what hit me is I looked at the periodic table differently, and I saw the squares with the letter C, and then children have those blocks, right, with the ABCs in the middle, and I saw a C in the middle of that block, and I thought, wait a minute. They're used to seeing letters in blocks all
Yeah.
the time. They've got those little wooden blocks that say A, B, C, D, whatever, and they put those together to spell cat. And it really dawned on me. And then I did some research and realized that the sweet spot for what I'm trying to do is when a child transitions from learning to read to reading to learn. And
Mm.
that's right around 8 years old. So that's where my eight comes as a bottom line. I'm not just being cheeky. It has to do with the neuroplasticity and what's available to a child at that age. And for the most part, in most societies, that is the region where they could look at carbon and think of it as a letter and differentiate it from calcium, Ca and C, and differentiate all those because they've just been through that with their own alphabet.
Hmm.
So here's a new alphabet, the alphabet of science. the letters are somewhat the same, but they mean a little bit different. And so you're just extending that. So I decided to put my money where my mouth is and say, all right, I think this will work. If we think about the alphabet of science, let's start teaching that to 8, 9 year olds and then have them put together Na for sodium, Cl for chlorine, make the word salt or sodium chloride, and see if they can start spelling simple words, which are simple chemical formulas, and build on that slowly and go through the same procedures that you use for teaching reading and teaching chemistry.
Hmm.
And lo and behold, it works. So um, I went to the lower ages, and what I realized, David, is that what we're teaching in college is not necessarily specific to college, right? I think we should really think about chemistry like teaching music or a foreign language. We know the best time to start is early when they're young. And so when you have something that's based on symbols, symbols are best taught early. Even numbers are symbols, right? So numbers are an extension of the language. So we start all that early.
Hmm.
And the reason we start in high school with the periodic table and then go on with chemistry, I have no idea, but there's no child developmental reason to do that. In fact, it's a disservice. And so that's why I'm passionate about it, because what we're teaching in college is most effectively taught in elementary school.
Hmm. Wow, that it totally makes sense. But looking at when I learned it more or less at the same time with the same timeline that you mentioned, high school somewhere, the start of it, and then and then by the end of like the 12th year, maybe something a little bit more complex, but yeah, never in elementary school for sure. Um, and it's interesting, and of course, it must have to do with like political priorities in terms of the programs, and so math, even now, computer literacy comes first, right? All of those things are first, and then there's a lot of things that take the backbench. Chemistry, like you said, has been one, but then other more like classical teaching also has taken that position even further back, like music, things like that, philosophy, I don't know. And yeah, it's surprising. I know someone who actually has a lot of fun and makes a job out of teaching philosophy to really young kids, and it works and they're ready for it. But the system, the educational system, the way it's set up right now, it's not a priority. So but it's interesting, and I'm thinking about my kids. So I have a 10-year-old, and he hasn't touched anything that sounds or looks like chemistry. um, so maybe I need to yeah, like I said before, to get your books and get him started.
Yeah, I would encourage you. Yeah, I think it's important.
Now, of course, one of the missions of Beyond the Thesis is to draw the curtain on what researchers are doing outside of academia. And from that point of view, another curiosity or another question I'd like to ask you is how, the first time you started having conversations with, I guess, schools or teachers about this, how was the reception, of this PhD who has been doing research and publishing papers all these years, coming to meet us about teaching chemistry to, how was the reception, and how do you feel today as a PhD who's, someone who's had all this academic, career, all throughout tenure, etc., to then be in a space where, naturally, you aren't so represented, let's say. Of course, there's people with EDDs, etc. But I'm talking about your specific profile: research, all the way, chemistry, teaching, and now in the elementary system. How did you navigate or negotiate your way into this new space as someone who may have a profile which is a bit, how can I say, imposing and daunting to other people? Oh, it's a PhD, Do you have any stories to share about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. There's twofold. So I'll start with your first question about just me presenting, my
Mm.
molecular literacy to elementary school teachers and whatnot. Chemistry needs a huge rebranding. We need to start all over again, because there's this hard and fast rule that it's a class everyone fails. I hear parents say, "Just get through it. It doesn't matter." And then another statistic is there are 50 STEM majors where chemistry is a prerequisite. So if you're telling your child that chemistry doesn't matter, just get through it, you are taking all of those science majors, STEM majors off the
Off
table. So that's engineering, that's microbiology, that's exercise science, that's environmental studies. There's so many, and people don't think about all the majors that take chemistry. Chemistry is a service course on campus, meaning we serve more alternative majors than our own majors, for
Mm.
sure. So this thought, well, I don't want to be a chemist, so I don't need to know this, is really hogwash because if you want to do anything that's remotely scientific for a career, you will be taking chemistry at some point. And the dreams that have been thwarted by failing chemistry are, could fill novels. So I mentioned that because I think right away there's a branding issue, and that goes down to teachers. Most elementary schools teachers um, avoided chemistry. And that's just my anecdotal evidence from talking, oh, I didn't take that, or or maybe they have a specialization in science, elementary school with a specialization in science, but that science is wildlife biology with no chemistry, right? So colleges of education can give science teaching like certificates without getting chemistry in there. So it's possible for this all to happen. And this is nobody's fault. And I'm not laying blame. I'm laying, this is what the system is providing. So when I get this glazed over look from educators and administrators, it's because of the branding. They may have had a terrible experience. Their friend had a terrible experience. They avoided it. Why would we want to do that to our kids? And you know so there's all of that. And so I think my comic books and the curriculum that I've developed around the comic books are fun, engaging, and really accessible. And when they see that, then they think maybe. So there's still, doubt, but there's at least a glimmer of, well, okay, if I can read about Big Ox, saving Lady Xenon from the evil, pirate Clive, well, maybe that'll work out for me. So anyway, so I get a lot of pushback because no one thinks it's possible. Um, and then in my own classroom, I've been teaching for 3 years, and in my own classroom, in my own environment, the kids love it. I have a huge periodic table in my classroom. It's a shower curtain, and they'll sit on the floor and just stare at it like they're daydreaming at the stars. And they want to know, and they want to be like, what is this one? What is this one? What is this one? And so I just made the periodic table part of the culture of my classroom. And I do teach other sciences. I'm a general science specialist, so I teach engineering. I'll teach, the life cycle of a sunflower. I always have an eye to molecular literacy, the science literacy, so they learn a lot of other things with that. Um, and my colleagues are very receptive to it. I think they see that I'm maternal by nature. So I think that my maternal nature, where I'm happy to, you know, read stories that have nothing to do with science with the kids just to get them to laugh a little bit, or, blow bubbles for a couple minutes because who doesn't love to blow bubbles? But then get them back into the world of science. So I have that maternal instinct with kids that's also really helpful to kind of integrate into the culture. And I'm also very respectful of their expertise. They have really hard jobs.
Mhm.
So
Oh yeah.
I
Mhm.
think it's super helpful to be a colleague because you get to see, like, you're like, man, like I see them for 45 minutes 3 times a week. You're with them the other. And and sometimes they're a
It's a
tough
lot of
bunch.
work.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And so where you work, clearly you have a good environment, but then yeah, there's this pressure, probably like you said, from bad experiences with the pedagogical aspect, I think, of teaching chemistry that gets people kind of like, and they build antibodies against it in a certain
Yeah,
way. that
yeah.
that you're, I think you're going to be slowly breaking, and these kids will come up learning. But one thing that I agree with you is, and it's also something that was inspiring in your work, is given the, just use the word pressure. I'm going to use it again. The pressure that's there today on scientists, on the scientific milieu as in general, from different, from media, from whatever, from different aspects of society, but also the pressure that exists on people, younger, older, to just go through life without asking too many questions. And now my head is going to different health issues to do with how, what we eat, what we drink, etc., etc. And I have a clear, at least for me, feeling that this type of literacy that you're promoting will engender citizens and humans that are going to be they're going to have better tools to be critical about these types of things, medication that you might be offered to take, or even just uh, you know abuse of drugs of
Hmm.
different kinds. The more you have some sort of scientific, and in this case specifically chemical literacy, the more tools you have to critically consider a situation or an opportunity and decide, yeah, no, that no, it's not going to be good for me, because it's connected, I think. I don't know if it's something you see. You've already mentioned, students of yours going to study medicine. You've already mentioned that if they don't get chemistry, those types of careers are off the table. But not everyone has to be a doctor. But I think I'd love to be in a society where everyone understands, when they read, they read the ingredients behind the package of something they're thinking of buying, they can actually understand, oh, this has this strange name, but it's kind of a sugar substitute, or it's a different name for sugar, or whatever. And although it's not directly related to what you're doing and the audience you have with the 8-year-olds today, I think it's connected, and I think, it's a I don't know if you agree, but I think it's, for me, it would be a very good kind of side effect or ripple effect from what you're doing as they grow up and become young adults.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I ended my TED talk with the phrase, chemistry isn't just science, it's a shared story of everything.
It
And
is.
yeah, I stand by that every day. And, as you were talking, I think about the phrase carbon footprint. And when I ask anyone, I mean, it can be anyone it can be my elementary school students, my colleagues, my family, my friends, what is a carbon footprint? And the image that they have is this like kind of sooty coal-like footprint. Like you look on the ground and you look for a black footprint where someone had just stepped in carbon and is walking. And I laugh at that, but then I think of the seriousness of that. If we have legislature or people in the government going to summits about the environment who aren't clear what a carbon footprint is, and what that phrase entails, and what carbon is in all its different forms and oxidation states, and what is the difference between methane and carbon dioxide? One's tetrahedral, one's linear. All of these things are fundamental molecular literacy understandings that can go a long way. And I shudder to think about these huge, environmental summits where 95% of the attendees can't imagine these processes. They're going through the motions robotically and parroting phrases that they had heard, and there's no molecular literacy, and that's really, really, really scary to me. Um, and I think that's a world where it happens on a grander scale. In medicine, I would trust your doctors. Your doctors have been through so much training,
Yeah.
right? So I think, you know, it's the communication that helps with medicine. But there's another area, and I just went through this with my mom, and we were shopping for cosmetics, and she had heard vitamin C is good for your skin, and I said, yeah, it is good for your skin. Let's go look at some products where, to your point, we're reading labels. And she reads, well, this doesn't have vitamin C. It has ascorbyl palmitate. And I was like, well, that's the best thing you could have in there. I'm like, ascorbyl palmitate. I'm like, Mom, that's the kind of vitamin C where they put a little tail on it to make it go through your skin better. And
A
I
fairy tale.
explained, I'm like, it's the water soluble kind, but then they make it like fat soluble and it'll go through your skin and it helps stabilize it. And I'm like, yeah, you want to look for ascorbyl palmitate. So,
Hmm.
so there's, just something as simple as I've heard vitamin C is good for your skin, and putting down a jar saying, well, that doesn't have it, and that's false advertising. And, so it's everywhere from these global summits where most of the attendees who are creating policy are molecularly illiterate to the way that I describe it, to, my mom being able to find a good cream for her face that she wants to use and get the most bang for her buck. So it's everywhere and it's critically important. And I love now that I am able to teach young people these things. And I teach them that. I teach them the name for vitamin C, and we write it down. They're fourth graders. They can write that word. Ascorbic acid isn't a tough word for them to write. And I draw the structure of vitamin C and we talk about it. And they can see it. Again, this notion that they can't see it would be like saying a 9-year-old can't read music. Of course they can read music. It's been going on for hundreds of years. So if they can read music, they can look at molecules.
Sure.
It's the same symbolic transformation.
Yeah, and their brain is ready to absorb all that information at that age, and the older they get, the harder it gets to,
Yeah.
unless you have that penchant, it's super interesting. Colleen, we're getting to the time flew. We're getting to the end of the interview. We've been talking about your books now for a while, and I don't want to end this conversation before having you share to the listeners or to the people watching where they can actually learn about what you do, but where they can get these books, or follow anything to do with your projects. Because, like you said, like I mentioned in the beginning, there's 4 books that are published, but there's more. Your program, there's more to come. Let's say. So, do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Everything is on my website. It's kidschemicalsolutions.com. And so right there, you can access the books, and there's a whole bunch of free stuff on there. So I encourage listeners to click on free games. There's an element decoder game that's a web-based
Mm.
game that's super fun, that's free. I also have free audiobooks on there.
Okay.
So if you go to the free section, you might have to navigate a little bit. It'll take you from my webpage to my publisher's site, but you'll get all of that. And then there's also a tab to my YouTube channel, which is Chemistry Colleen. So I have a YouTube channel where I appeal to a younger audience, a preschool audience, and you'll see me in my periodic table apron and my getup, and I become a character. And so we explore why red onions make your tummy sting, to you know why where the beta carotene is in spinach. So there's all kinds of cool little episodes in there. So you can go to my YouTube channel too.
Excellent. Very good. I'll put all those links in the show notes of the episode. Uh, Now, if people want to reach out to you, they want, I don't know, to thank you for something you shared, or ask, dig a little bit deeper into something you have shared, is LinkedIn a good place to reach
Yes.
out for you, to reach out to you?
Yep. My LinkedIn profile. Yes.
Excellent, perfect. And so again, I'll also add that in the show notes. Now, I have a last question before
Sure.
before ending our conversation, which is um, to because I hear from a lot of graduate students that, and actually, it's one of the worries they have, even for their transition to the job market after, is I want to have an impact. I want to have an impact on society. Sometimes it's even depending on their domain and their study subject. It may be on my community. They all they want to have an impact. They're becoming young scientists, and one of their worries is I want what I do to count for someone, for a community. Sometimes it's towards a disease. Sometimes it's because they have a family member who suffers from a disease, etc. And I really find your journey inspiring in that sense of you've had, like we said, your academic career, and as we know, when you have all these years teaching and doing research and teaching and publishing, but especially teaching, you do have impact on generations, cohorts and cohorts of young people who then go into the job market in different domains. But now it feels to me like you're bringing your specific flavor of science to what is or has been an underserved, I don't know, how to say, layer of the community, which are these young kids. And so it feels to me that now you're really in the very local community, bringing,
Yeah.
leading this mission. And I wonder whether you have a word of inspiration for someone who's in the lab thinking, okay, I'm doing this. I don't feel exactly how, because this happens often, right? You're doing your, let's say, PhD project, and it's a very tiny, very pointy, very specialized small brick of this huge scientific wall, and sometimes you can lose kind of the proportion of things. And I wonder whether you have a word of inspiration and maybe a word of motivation for them to feel better about what they do, but to also think about ways what they do, maybe not specifically, but in general, can actually be retold in other ways and actually reach wider wider audiences, or close communities that are closer to them. And I know it's a very wide question, but I because you're living it, I wonder whether you have based on your story, based on being a first generation graduate student and having done the academic career, and now got in this chapter doing this, whether there's some sort of wisdom or story, or a little nugget of inspiration that you can share with them. And sorry for being very wordy, but I'm
No,
trying to
I've
find
never
a way to give you
I've never
cues.
gotten this question, but you hit it on the head. I mean, my PhD thesis was on cycloaddition reactions of chiral manganese complexes. And my friends would ask me all the time, what is that used for? And I had to shrug my shoulders. At the time we had Department of Energy funding. It was organometallic chemistry, so there's some catalysis aspects to it for energy. Really, though, it was I was immersed in the most basic of basic researches. I was making molecules that had never been made before just for the sake of making them. Really, I mean, I really can't put a spin that I was saving anybody's lives or helping any the environment or doing anything other than making some cool complexes that were sometimes colorful, fun, tricky to isolate, air sensitive, whatever. There was a skill set. So I lived that world for a long time where I would get that question. What kept me going is it was really fun, super fun. Like there's no place else in the world I would have rather been than in lab making these because every day I was like, oh, wait, did I get it? Did it work? And so there's a puzzle and there's a complexity. So my advice would be do what you love, something will happen with it. I don't know if anything ever resulted from my research. I don't know if there was ever, a decades later spin-off that resulted in some kind of catalysis that allowed, saved all this energy. I
Hmm.
don't know. And we may never know. And that's the beauty of basic research. So I'm a huge, huge supporter of basic research, research for the sake of research, because you don't know where it's going to go. But where I do know where it led me is to where I am now. So had that not been so much fun, maybe I wouldn't have finished my PhD. But I thought it was a lot of fun. So yeah, it's tricky, right? And I
Hmm.
think always having a purpose. And I think it's different now. Even when I became a faculty member, I kind of had to figure out ways to how can I make my grant proposal relevant? Because you have to write that section.
Of course.
Um, so that is tricky. You have to find a spin on it. But ultimately, if you are doing research for the sake of research and enjoying it, know that it is value somewhere. And it's mostly value to the development of you as a scientist and you as a seasoned scientist who knows how to answer questions and has techniques eventually will help society. So I have no doubt about that. So it's not that everybody needs to be making drugs to cure cancer. I think these really discrete, minute problems to be solved develop you as a human being who can solve problems. And who knows them? Like for me, I never would have known I was going to be writing comic books and teaching elementary school students at the time. But it led me there. So I would just say keep going if you're having fun and don't worry about what the relevance is. I think we are putting way too much emphasis on the outcome and not the process.
Hmm. Very good, very good, and it's important. It's important because, again, also young, young graduates are getting, are asked these questions when they're asking for grants and whatnot. So I guess that's why they kind of worry about it. But yeah, thank you for that because it's it's a long process, especially like the PhD is a long process, and it shouldn't be kind of marred by these sorts of questions. And I thank you for sharing your precise example, which exactly fit into what I was saying, which is
Yeah.
you're participating in the scientific adventure of humanity. So you, of course, you're bringing a very small part of the puzzle, but do it, do it with passion and follow your curiosity. And I feel that today young graduate programs are giving a lot of opportunities for science communication for young researchers. Take those opportunities because although your specific PhD project may be not so easy to connect with a specific impact in society, there's now other very cool ways to do it, and that are getting more and more adopted, like 3-minute thesis
Mhm.
competitions and things like that. Do that. Do those or brain awareness week events where you go to schools and actually get to teach some things about neurons in the brain. Take those opportunities to feel that you're close to the community, to actually take get the pulse of what kids are learning or interested in, and then just finish your project, and then you'll have more you'll have more power to steer where you want to go as a researcher and as a professor and as an investigator. I think anyway that's what I get from what
Yes.
you said, and I think it's a great message to share and a great way to end this interview. Colleen, this has been a pleasure. Again, like I said, I'm really enchanted with your project and with the way you're actually making it materialize around you in classrooms with kids. And yeah, I really hope it catches. The fire catches, and that more and more young people get access to this literacy, which is, let's say, not popular, but I kind of wish that it becomes
Yeah,
popular,
I
because
hope
I
so
think
too.
I think it's important. Scientific literacy in general, but in this case of our conversation, chemical and molecular and 3D literacy, which is what you focus on. So thank you so much for this, for your time, and yeah, all the best for your projects. Anyway, I wonder. I'd love to hear about you a few years from now, and you sharing stories about, people you taught as kids and where they are now. I'd love to hear those
Yes,
types of stories.
me too. Thank you.
Very good.